There's a village in England where the entire population was evacuated for Christmas in 1943, told they could come home after the war, and 82 years later, they're still waiting. The last evacuee died in May of 2025, aged 100, having spent his whole life trying to get back. And honestly, that's not even the strangest story on this list. Britain looks tidy on a map. Patchwork fields, ancient hedgerows, picture postcard villages with thatched roofs and pubs called the Coach and Horses. You drive past these places thinking nothing much has ever happened in them, which is exactly the kind of mistake that gets you blindsided by a town named after a food fight, or a fishing village that crowns its bookseller as king, or a Welsh community that quietly drowned itself into the foundation of a national identity. These aren't urban legends or tabloid filler. Every single one of these places exists, has residents, pays council tax, and shows up on Google Maps. They're just hiding histories so weird that once you know them, you can never look at a Sunday drive through the British countryside the same way again. Hit the like button now if you've ever driven through a village and wondered what was actually going on behind the curtains. Subscribe so the algorithm stops pretending you want another video about chicken coops. And let's get into it. By the time we hit number 1, you'll genuinely question whether anyone in Britain has ever made a normal decision. Number 15. Brockworth and the Cooper's Hill cheese roll. Let's start with a sport that England invented, England maintains, and England's own emergency services would prefer England stopped doing. Every spring bank holiday, Monday, a few hundred people gather at the top of a hillside in Gloucestershire that has a gradient of 1:2, which is engineering language for this is technically a cliff with grass on it. Someone releases a 9-pound wheel of double Gloucester cheese down the slope. The cheese hits 70 miles an hour within seconds, and the contestants throw themselves down the hill after it. That's the entire sport. The cheese always wins because the cheese is uncatchable. Whoever crosses the finish line at the bottom first, conscious or otherwise, gets to keep it. Brockworth itself is a perfectly normal Cotswolds village of about 7,000 people, 3 miles east of Gloucester, and the cheese roll has been documented in local records since 1826, with some locals insisting it goes back 600 years to grazing rights or pagan spring rituals. The event was officially cancelled in 2010 on safety grounds. The villagers responded by calling themselves Rebel Rollers and running it anyway, every year, ever since. The injuries are part of the brand. Worst year on record was 1997, when 33 people ended up in hospital. The 2023 women's race was won by Delaney Irving, a Canadian who actually crossed the finish line unconscious and only learned she'd won when she woke up in the medical tent. Chris Anderson, a soldier from the 1st Battalion, the Rifles, has won 23 cheeses since 2005, which would be more impressive if he didn't openly admit he doesn't even like the stuff. His exact words were that he only likes cheddar. The cheese itself was made for decades by a woman named Diana Smart, who started cheese making at 60, supplied the wheels until 2021, and was once formally warned by Gloucestershire police at the age of 86 that she could be held legally liable if anyone got injured chasing one of her cheeses down a hill. They protested that year by using a foam replica. Royal Mail issued a Cooper's Hill stamp in 2019. Netflix made a documentary. Animal Crossing added a double Gloucester item to the game that you can only collect between May 22nd and the 31st. An entire cottage industry of medical bills, video views, and international tourism revolves around the fact that a small English village will not, under any circumstances, stop chucking dairy down a cliff. Up next, a town that decided cheese rolling wasn't quite mad enough. Number 14. Llanwrtyd, Wales. Picture an old Victorian spa town in mid-Wales, population around 850, calls itself the smallest town in Britain, sits on a beautiful stretch of railway line, and looks for all the world like the kind of place where nothing has happened since 1890. Now picture that same town inventing the World Bog Snorkeling Championship, the Man vs Horse Marathon, and the World Mountain Bike Bog Snorkeling Championship, all over pints in the same pub. The pub is called the Neuadd Arms. The man behind it was Gordon Green, an ex-London ice cream factory manager who took the place over in the 1970s and watched the spa trade collapse around him. Around 1980, looking for a way to put the town back on the map, Green and his regulars started brainstorming the most ridiculous events they could possibly run, inspired by a Birmingham man who'd raised charity money by bathing in baked beans. The Man versus Horse Marathon was the first one out of the pub. 22 miles, 4,000 feet of climb, humans against actual horses with riders. Locals figured the horses would obviously win every year, which they did for 24 straight years, until Hugh Lobb finally beat the field in 2004, finishing in 2 hours and 5 minutes and pocketing a £25,000 jackpot from William Hill that had rolled over for more than 2 decades. An Austrian called Florian Holzinger did it again in 2007. The bog snorkelling came in 1985. 2 60-yard lengths of a peat water trench at Llanwrtyd, snorkel and mask and flippers required, and the rules state clearly that no recognisable swimming strokes are allowed. The world record sits at 1 minute and 18.81 seconds, set by Neil Rutter in 2018, with the women's record held by Kirsty Johnson at 1 minute and 22.56. More than 160 international competitors turn up every August, and at least one contestant has snorkeled the bog while simultaneously carrying an ironing board, which is a recognised offshoot called extreme ironing. Lonely Planet has bog snorkelling in its top 50 must-do experiences worldwide. The bog itself is a site of special scientific interest. None of this would exist if a man who used to manage an ice cream factory hadn't taken over a quiet Welsh pub and decided that chartered accountants in flippers was a viable tourism strategy. Speaking of bad ideas that worked, the next town carries flaming barrels of tar through its high street, while spectators stand close enough to feel their eyebrows singe. Number 13. Ottery, St Mary. Ottery St Mary is a market town in East Devon of about 9,000 people, sitting prettily on the River Otter, 12 miles east of Exeter. The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge was born here in 1772. It looks, on every other day of the year, like the platonic ideal of a sleepy Devon parish. Then, November the 5th arrives, and things get medieval. The festival starts at 5:30 in the morning with handheld cannons firing across the town to wake everybody up. By 4 in the afternoon, the children's barrels begin. Because in Ottery, even the kids participate. By 7 o'clock, the men's barrels are out. At midnight, they bring out what's known locally as the Gert Big Un, a hogshead-sized cask weighing more than 30 kilograms, soaked through with tar. These barrels are set on fire. Then a man, picked because he was born in Ottery, hoists one onto his bare shoulders and runs through narrow medieval streets that are absolutely packed with thousands of spectators standing close enough to touch the flames as they pass. 17 barrels are lit each night, each sponsored by a different local pub. The official advice if a flaming barrel comes towards you is, and this is a direct quote from the town, "Do not run, lean away. Nobody actually knows where it came from." Theories include the foiling of the gunpowder plot in 1605, plague fumigation, and beacon warnings of the Spanish Armada in 1588. What's documented is that you must have been born in Ottery to roll a barrel. The tradition is hereditary, and in 2009 someone threw an aerosol can into a lit barrel as a sabotage attempt, which exploded and injured 12 people. The festival continued anyway. Ottery also celebrates a thing called Pixie Day every June, where the local cubs and brownies reenact the legend of pixies being banished into a cave called Pixie's Parlour. So even when they're not on fire, they're a little unusual. Heading north now to a Scottish village that performs an even older fire ritual and refuses to acknowledge the calendar everyone else has been using since 1752. Number 12. Burghead. When Britain switched from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar in 1752, it skipped 11 days. Riots broke out across the country. People lost their birthdays. Workers thought their landlords were stealing nearly 2 weeks of their lives. Most communities eventually got over it. Burghead, on the Moray Firth in northeast Scotland, just refused. The village sits on a peninsula 9 miles northwest of Elgin, has a population of around 1,500, and was built between 18005 and 18009 directly on top of what had been the largest Pictish fort in Britain, which the construction unfortunately destroyed about half of. Every January 11th, which is what the rest of the world now calls a regular Tuesday in winter, the village celebrates Old New Year's Eve with a ceremony called the Burning of the Clavey, and they have been doing it for so long that it was being denounced from the pulpit in the 1600s as, and the wording is wonderful, an abominable heathenish practice. The clavey is a half-barrel packed with staves and tar and creosote, mounted on a carrying pole and fixed using the same ritual nail year after year. At 6 o'clock in the evening, it's lit using a smouldering peat from the hearth of a former provost, and a group of about 20 Burghead-born men called the Clavey Crew carry it clockwise around the village on a fixed route. The ceremony ends on Dorey Hill, on the actual ramparts of the Pictish fort, where the burning clavey is rolled down. Locals scramble for the embers, which are believed to ward off witches. Some embers get mailed to exiled Burghead natives, known as brochures, scattered across the world. The man who runs the whole operation is Dan Ralph, who's been Clavey King since 1988. He's a joiner and undertaker, the 7th Daniel Ralph in succession. His family has been in Burghead since 1758, and his sons and grandsons are now in the crew. His mantra about the ritual is genuinely beautiful. He says the crew is not at liberty to change anything, and that if they allow change, they have literally blown it. A woman named Hilary Gloyer has been receiving a clavey stake, by tradition, every year for over 60 years. The first stake of every night, by tradition, goes to the station hotel. About 4,500 people now turn up for the big ceremony, which is 3 times the population of the village itself. Burghead celebrates 2 New Year's Eves every single year, just to spite a king who's been dead since 1760. From one fire festival to another, only this one was invented by people who were trying to get everyone to drink less. Number 11. Lerwick and Up Helly are. Lerwick is the most northerly town in the United Kingdom, capital of Shetland, 100 miles north of mainland Scotland, with a population of around 7,000. Shetland was Scandinavian until 1468, when Christian I of Denmark pawned it to Scotland as part of his daughter's dowry, and never quite forgot the fact. On the last Tuesday of every January, Lerwick switches off its streetlights. About 1,000 men, and since 2023, women, dress as Vikings. They throw 1,000 flaming torches into a 30-foot replica longship that they spent 4 months building by hand, and then they party in 12 different halls across the town until 8 in the morning. It's called Up Helly. It's the largest fire festival in Europe, and the most surprising fact about it is that the entire thing was invented by a temperance society. Here's the actual history. After the Napoleonic Wars, returning soldiers and sailors brought back a tradition of rowdy Yuletide tar barrelling, which sometimes involved leaving lit barrels on the doorsteps of unpopular townspeople. Tar barrelling got banned in 1874. The Total Abstinence Society, looking for a wholesome alternative, came up with torch processions instead. The first Yule procession was in 1876. The first proper Up Helly was in 1881, and it got institutionalised in 1882 to mark the visit of Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh. A Shetland writer called Haldane Burgess then wrote a book called The Viking Path in 1894, which invented the entire Norse theme that everyone now associates with the festival. The first galley was burned in 1889, the Gwysa Jarl character was added in 1906, and the result is that a teetotal social improvement movement somehow created what is now considered Britain's biggest single drinking event of the year. To become Gwysa Jarl, you serve 16 years on the committee. Each Jarl spends 15 years or more planning his costume. Women were banned from the squads until 2023, although several joined disguised as men as far back as 1901, because some traditions are easier to follow if you ignore them quietly. About 5,000 spectators show up annually in a town of 7,000 in Shetland in January in the dark. Now we leave the fire festivals and head to a Welsh peninsula where the village isn't actually a village, but the most ambitious architectural prank ever pulled in Britain. Number 10. Portmeirion. There's a village on the Welsh coast that looks like it was airlifted in from the Italian Riviera. Pastel buildings, a campanile, fountains, a piazza, palm trees, and a bay opening onto the Dwyrid estuary that genuinely looks Mediterranean if you squint. The thing is, it's in Gwynedd in North Wales, and it was built over 51 years by one architect, who described it as a home for fallen buildings. The architect's name was Sir Bertram Clough Williams Ellis, and he was magnificent. Spent only 3 months at architecture school, founding member of the Council for the Protection of Rural England. Wrote a book in 1928 called England and the Octopus, which was a furious attack on suburban sprawl. Bought a derelict private peninsula called Eyam in 1925. Opened the Hotel Portmeirion on April 2nd of 1926 to fund the rest of the construction, and kept building until he completed the final structure in 1976 in his 93rd year. He died at 94. In accordance with his wishes, 20 years after his death, some of his ashes were placed in a marine rocket and launched in a New Year's Eve firework display over the estuary, which is, you have to admit, an exit. The reason he called it a home for fallen buildings is that he genuinely went around Britain rescuing condemned mansions and shipping the pieces to North Wales. The Bell Tower, finished in 1928, was built from the stones of a 12th century castle ruin and uses a chiming clock from an abandoned London brewery. The town hall was assembled from the salvaged remains of Emerald Hall in Flintshire, which was about to be demolished. After both the National Trust and the V&A refused to save it, Williams Ellis took a train to the auction himself and bought a 17th century Hercules plasterwork ceiling for £13. He sawed it into 100 pieces and reassembled it on site. Noel Coward wrote Blithe Spirit in the Fountain. Too Sweet in 1941. H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, Ingrid Bergman and Frank Lloyd Wright all stayed there. Patrick McGoohan filmed the entire surrealist 1967 spy series The Prisoner on location, and the village was kept secret in the credits until the final episode aired. Today, the place gets around 200,000 visitors a year, has no permanent residents, and remains the most beautiful argument against planning permission in the British Isles. Now, from a place with no real residents to a village whose name has too many letters to fit on a postcard. Number 9. Llanfair PG. The full name is Llanfair Pwlgwing Ilgogorichwyr Endrobl Lantiziliogogogok. It has 58 letters, 18 syllables, and translates roughly as St. Mary's Church in the hollow of the White Hazel near a rapid whirlpool and the Church of St. Tysilio of the Red Cave. It is the longest place name in Europe, sits on the Isle of Anglesey just over the Menai Strait from Bangor, has a population of around 2,900 people, and the most surprising thing about it is that the name is essentially Victorian marketing. The original village was just called Pwlgwingil. The whirlpool referenced in the name is real, a genuinely lethal stretch of tidal water called the Swellies that sits between Telford's 1826 Menai Suspension Bridge and Stevenson's 1850 Britannia Bridge. In 1869, after the Britannia Bridge brought rail traffic to the area, an anonymous local tailor proposed extending the name to the absurd length we know today, specifically so the railway station would have the longest signboard in Britain. It worked. The tailor, by all accounts, refused to ever take credit and let the secret die with him. About 200,000 people a year now come to photograph the station sign. The Channel 4 weatherman Liam Dutton went viral in September 2015 for pronouncing the entire thing on live television without breaking a sweat. Volkswagen used it in a 2024 advert about their AI speech recognition. Civilization 5 awards a STEAM achievement called Longest Name Ever if you found a city with that name. There's even a longer place name on a hill in New Zealand, 85 letters, but Llanfair PG holds the European record. A town with 21 consonants in a row has more cultural footprint than most cities of 1 million people. Up next, a town that's been waiting to come home from the war for over 80 years. Number 8. Tyneham. Tyneham is a village in Dorset that was evacuated with 24 hours notice given just before Christmas of 1943, so that the British Army could use it for D-Day rehearsals. The villagers were promised they could return after the war was over. 82 years later, they still haven't. The Domesday-era manor had been held by the Bond family since 1683. The village had a population of 225 people. On November the 16th of 1943, every household received a notice telling them the village and 7,500 acres around it would be requisitioned. By the time they finished evacuating, just before Christmas Eve, Churchill had personally pledged that they could come back after the emergency was over. The villagers left a note pinned to the door of St Mary's Church before they walked out. It read, "Please treat the church and houses with care. We have given up our homes, where many of us have lived for generations, to help win the war to keep men free. We shall return one day, and thank you for treating the village kindly." The War Office issued a compulsory purchase order in 1948. Tyneham House, a 14th century manor, was demolished in 1967, and its eastern front was rebuilt at Athelhampton. Limited public access reopened in 1975, but the villagers have never been allowed home. The last surviving evacuee, a man named Peter Wellman, died in May of 2025 at the age of 100. The village still has its 1929 K1 Mark 236 telephone kiosk, although it's a Frankenstein replacement after the original was destroyed during the 1985 filming of Bill Douglas's Comrades. Locals claim that the phone in the kiosk has occasionally been heard ringing. The story has inspired Patrick Wright's The Village That Died for England in 1995, Natasha Solomon's novel The House at Tyneford in 2011, and Lorna Cook's The Forgotten Village in 2019. Tyneham itself is open to visitors only on certain days each year when the army isn't using the surrounding land for live fire exercises, and walking through it now is like walking through a place that someone hit pause on in December 1943 and nobody ever found the play button. If you're still with me, hit the subscribe button. The next 10 minutes contain the densest weirdness in this whole video, including a North Sea pirate radio principality with its own coup attempt, and a village that voluntarily quarantined itself to die. Heading to Wales now, where an entire valley was deliberately drowned to give Liverpool a glass of water. Number 7. Capel Celyn. In December of 1955, the residents of Capel Celyn, a small Welsh-speaking village in the Tyneham Valley in Gwynedd, found out that their entire community was going to be deliberately flooded by reading about it in the Liverpool Daily Post a few days before Christmas. The village had a population of 67, of whom 48 would lose their homes. 12 houses, the chapel, the post office, the school, and 800 acres of farmland would be drowned to create a reservoir that would supply industrial water to Liverpool. The Tyneham Reservoir Bill was a private bill that bypassed all Welsh planning authorities entirely, which meant local objections had no legal weight. A defence committee, led by a man named Dafydd Roberts and a woman called Elizabeth May Watkin-Jones, marched on Liverpool twice. 35 out of 36 Welsh MPs voted against the bill. Not a single Welsh MP voted in favour. The Liverpool councillor Bessie Braddock, replying to the objections, said that everyone deplored the fact that in the interests of progress, sometimes people had to suffer. But that was progress. The Liverpool Corporation Act received royal assent on August 1st of 1957, and the project went ahead. What happened next was that Capel Celyn essentially midwifed modern Welsh nationalism. In September of 1962, 2 members of Plaid Cymru sabotaged a transformer at the dam site. In February of 1963, a group called Mudiad Amddiffyn Cymru, the Welsh defence movement, blew the transformer up entirely. The chapel held its final service on September the 28th of 1963. The reservoir was officially opened on October the 21st of 1965, in a ceremony so badly disrupted by Welsh protesters cutting cables and shouting down speakers that it had to be cut short. Liverpool City Council finally apologised in 2005, on the 50th anniversary, for what it described as the insensitivity of its predecessors. The slogan, Cofilch Tryweryn, meaning Remember Tryweryn, was painted by an artist called Mike Stevens on a ruined wall near Aberystwyth, and has become a Welsh national landmark, repeatedly defaced and repeatedly repainted. When the reservoir levels drop during droughts, like they did spectacularly in 2022, the cemetery wall, the bridge stumps and the foundations of the houses re-emerge from the water. Up next, a Derbyshire village that did the moral opposite, by walling themselves in to protect everyone else. Number 6. Eyam. In late August of 1665, a tailor in Eyam called Alexander Hadfield received a damp bale of cloth from London. His journeyman, a man named George Vickers, opened the bale, hung the cloth in front of the fire to dry, and unwittingly released a colony of plague-infected fleas into a Derbyshire village of about 800 people. Vickers was buried on September the 7th of 1665. 23 more people died by October. After a winter lull, the plague exploded again in spring of 1666. The young rector, Reverend William Mompesson, did something almost unbelievable. Working with his ejected Puritan predecessor Thomas Stanley, he convinced the entire village to voluntarily quarantine themselves so the plague wouldn't spread to surrounding communities. The villagers agreed to bury their own dead immediately wherever they fell, to move all church services outdoors to a place called Cucklet Delph, and crucially, to let absolutely nobody leave. Mompesson made an arrangement with the Earl of Devonshire at Chatsworth to leave provisions at the village boundary. At a place called the Boundary Stone and at a spring called Mompesson's Well, neighbouring villagers left food. Eyam villagers paid for the supplies by dropping coins into hollows filled with vinegar or running water, which they believed would disinfect them. People still find the occasional coin in those hollows today. The numbers from 1666 are devastating. Between August 3rd and August 10th, a woman called Elizabeth Hancock at Riley Farm buried her husband and 6 of her children with her own hands, dragging the bodies up the hillside while neighbours watched, helpless, from a safe distance. The Riley graves still mark the spot. On August 25th, Mompesson's young wife Catherine died. Walking with her in the meadow shortly before, she had remarked on a sweet smell in the air, which is now known to be a symptom of plague-caused internal organ failure. She was the only plague victim to be buried in the consecrated churchyard. The last villager to die was Abraham Morton. On November 1st of 1666, roughly 260 of the original 800 villagers died, a mortality rate of about 75% among those who stayed. Mompesson wrote afterwards that his ears had never heard such doleful lamentations, that 76 families had been visited in his parish, and that 259 persons had died. Modern DNA studies have found that descendants of Eyam villagers carry a mutation called CCR 5-delta-32 at unusually high frequency, which suggests the plague itself naturally selected the survivors. Geraldine Brooks' 2001 novel Year of Wonders turned the story into a global bestseller, and the whole tale enjoyed an unexpected cultural revival during COVID-19 for what should be obvious reasons. From a village that walled itself in to die, we go to a town that crowned a bookseller as its king and made his horse Prime Minister. Number 5. Hay-on-Wye. On April Fool's Day of 1977, the Welsh market town of Hay-on-Wye, population about 1,500, declared independence from the United Kingdom. The man who declared it was a local second-hand bookseller called Richard Booth. The crown he wore was made of cardboard and tin. The orb of office was a recycled bullcock. The Prime Minister was his horse, a creature called Goldie. The Foreign Secretary was his dog. The whole thing should have been ignored as performance art, except it wasn't, because Richard Booth was actually trying to save his town. Booth was Oxford educated and had opened his first second-hand bookshop in Hayes Old Fire Station in 1962. By the 1970s, he was watching rural depopulation hollow out small Welsh towns, and he wanted to do something attention-grabbing about it. So, the independent kingdom of Hay was born, complete with homemade Hay passports, Haypenny currency, an invented sausage called the Hay sausage, and a slogan that read, "Home Rule for Hay." The Welsh office had to issue an official statement clarifying that Hay was not actually an independent country, which delighted Booth more than anything else could have. The book trade he built was equally ambitious. Booth bought stock in bulk from defunct American libraries and was famously photographed with his Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 crammed full of second-hand books. At its peak, Hay-on-Wye had more than 30 second-hand bookshops. About 20 of them survive today, holding around 10 million books between them, in a town of 1,500 residents. The Hay Festival of Literature was founded in 1988 by Norman Roeder and Peter Florence, and the early years were reportedly funded by Peter Florence's poker winnings around the family kitchen table. Bill Clinton visited in 2001 and called Hay the Woodstock of the mind. Tony Benn said that in his head, Hay had replaced Christmas. In 2009, Booth's former employee Paul Harris staged a mock trial of the festival for treason, accusing it of gentrification, and ended the event with a fake beheading. Booth's reply was, "The revolting peasants are revolting," which is the only acceptable response to a fake beheading. When Booth died on August 20th of 2019, signs reading "The King is dead" appeared in shop windows across town. Now we leave dry land entirely for a country that was built on a wartime gun platform in the North Sea. Number 4. The Principality of Sealand. 7 nautical miles off the Suffolk coast, near Felixstowe, there is an old World War II anti-aircraft platform called HM Fort Ruffs. It was built in 1942, has a deck about the size of a tennis court, and has been ruled, since September 2nd of 1967, as a hereditary principality by a former British Army Major and pirate radio broadcaster called Paddy Roy Bates. Bates seized the platform in what's now called the Battle of Ruffs Tower in 1967, declared the Principality of Sealand on his wife Joan's birthday, and when his son Michael fired warning shots at British workmen in 1968, Justice Chapman at Chelmsford ruled that the platform was outside UK jurisdiction. Bates took this as de facto recognition. The country has a constitution, a coat of arms, a motto, E Mare Libertas, meaning from the sea freedom, a Sealand dollar with Princess Joan's face on the coins, and a passport. The really good story is the 1978 coup. A German diamond dealer called Alexander Achenbach, who had styled himself Prime Minister of Sealand, disagreed with Bates over whether to build a duty-free hotel and casino on the platform. On August 8th of 1978, while Roy and Joan were lured to Austria for a meeting that turned out to be a setup, Achenbach hired German and Dutch mercenaries who arrived by helicopter, seized Sealand, captured Michael Bates, held him for 3 days without food or water, and dumped him in the Netherlands. Roy Bates flew home and on August 16th mounted a counter-attack helicopter raid, piloted by a man with prior James Bond film experience. Michael abseiled onto the deck with a shotgun. The mercenaries surrendered. Bates declared his captives prisoners of war. The Dutch nationals were repatriated. A German lawyer called Gernot Putz, who held a Sealand passport, was charged with treason and ransomed for 75,000 Deutsche Marks, which is about £23,000. Bates claimed that the West German embassy's negotiation was further de facto recognition. Sealand still operates today. The Bates family revoked all passports in 1997 after they discovered a Madrid forgery ring had sold around 4,000 fake ones, with as many as 150,000 fake Sealand passports in circulation worldwide. You can buy noble titles online, with Lord or Lady running about £30 and Duke or Duchess at £499.99. Ed Sheeran has been Baron of Sealand since 2012. Guinness recognises it as the smallest area to lay claim to nation status. Now, from a country built on concrete pillars in the sea to a village built inside a stone circle so old it was already ancient when the Romans showed up. Number 3. Avebury. Avebury looks like a perfectly ordinary English village. There's a pub called the Red Lion, a Norman church, a manor house, about 600 residents, and the kind of Wiltshire calm that makes you want to order a ploughman's. Then you notice that the entire village is sitting inside the largest prehistoric stone circle in the world. The henge was built around 2850 to 2200 BC. It originally consisted of a bank and ditch enclosure 421 metres in diameter, enclosing 28.5 acres. The ditch was 9 metres deep, the bank 9 metres high, which means it was a 60-foot total barrier dug by people using red deer antlers as picks, who had to shift more than 200,000 tonnes of chalk to do it. The outer Great Circle once held about 100 standing sarsen stones, the largest weighing roughly 100 tonnes. Only about 30 are still visible today. Now here's where the story turns into something out of a horror film. In the 14th century, local villagers, probably directed by a parish priest, decided the stones were the work of the devil and started toppling them into pre-dug pits and burying them. In 1938, an archaeologist called Alexander Keeler was excavating one of the stones, known as Stone 9, and found a complete human skeleton beneath 13 tons of buried sarsen. With the skeleton was a leather pouch containing 3 silver coins dated to around 1320, a pair of iron scissors, among the earliest in England, and an iron probe and lancet. The man was identified as a medieval barber surgeon, almost certainly killed when the stone he was helping to topple came down on him. Crush injuries were visible on the skull, pelvis, and spine. The skeleton was thought to have been destroyed in a 1941 bombing of the Royal College of Surgeons, but a researcher called Mike Pitts tracked it down again in 1998 in the Natural History Museum's basement. The Black Death of 1348 to 1349 then halted any further stone burying in Avebury, which probably saved the monument from total destruction. Alexander Keiler himself, the man who excavated all of this, was an absolute character. He was the heir to the James Keiler and Son Dundee marmalade fortune. He married 4 times. His correspondence was reportedly so scandalous that his executors burned it after his death. He was, allegedly, fond of locking mistresses semi-clad in laundry baskets and hitting them with a furled umbrella. He was also president of the Ski Club of Great Britain. He bought Avebury Manor and the surrounding land in the 1930s, demolished the cottages encroaching on the stones, and re-erected the fallen sarsens. Today, you can drink a pint at the Red Lion, which sits literally inside the southern inner circle, and is reputedly haunted by a woman called Florrie, who was drowned in the well by her jealous landlord husband. The well is now glass-covered in the bar floor. Druids and modern pagans gather at the solstices. The BBC's 1977 children's series Children of the Stones, often described as the scariest children's programme ever made, was filmed here. Up next, an entire Yorkshire town with a tourism industry built on one bad-tempered visit by an Irish theatre manager. Number 2. Whitby Bram Stoker arrived in Whitby in late July of 1890 to take a holiday at a guest house called Mrs. Emma Vesey's at 6 Royal Crescent. The recommendation had come from his employer, the actor-manager Henry Irving. At the time, Stoker was working on a vampire novel, and his villain was called Count Wampire, which is a name nobody would have remembered. On August 8th of 1890, the very date that the Demeter later wrecks in the finished novel, Stoker walked to Weston came from the same churchyard. He also copied 168 Yorkshire dialect words from the Whitby Museum Library. The shipwreck of a Russian schooner called the Dmitry of Narva, which was beached on Tate Hill Sands in October of 1885 carrying a cargo of silver sand, became, in the novel, the Demeter of Varna. The town then turned this entirely accidental literary tourism into one of Britain's strangest cultural exports. Whitby Goth Weekend was founded in 1994 by a woman called Jo Hampshire as a meetup of about 40 NME pen pals at the Elsinore and the Little Angel pubs. It went biannual in 1997, running every April and Halloween. Today, it contributes about £1.1 million annually to the Whitby economy and roughly 10,000 bed nights. The October 2007 weekend was dedicated to the murdered goth Sophie Lancaster. Whitby also happens to be where Captain James Cook learned to sail. Cook moved to the town in 1746 as an apprentice to the Quaker shipowner John Walker. All 4 ships of his 3 voyages, Endeavour, Resolution, Adventure and Discovery, were Whitby-built colliers known as Whitby Cats. H.M. Bark Endeavour was launched in June of 1764 by the shipwright Thomas Fishburn, originally named the Earl of Pembroke, and was bought by the Royal Navy in 1768 for £2,840, 10 shillings and 11 pence. Whitby jet, a fossilised wood from the Jurassic period, was carved into Victorian mourning jewellery and most famously worn by Queen Victoria after Prince Albert died in 1861. At its peak in the 1870s, the trade employed around 1,500 people in Whitby. Tourists still ask for Dracula's tomb at St Mary's Churchyard. It does not exist. Locals usually point them towards a worn skull and crossbones grave that's actually a stonemason's marker, and the tourists go home happy. And finally, the most ambitious weird town on the entire list, where King Arthur is reportedly buried under a music festival. Number 1. Glastonbury. Glastonbury is a small Somerset town of about 9,000 people, 23 miles south of Bristol. It is dominated by a 518-foot hill called the Tor. capped by the roofless 14th century tower of St Michael's Church, surrounded by what was once marshland that turned the hill into a near island in winter, which is why people called it the Isle of Avalon. And essentially, every weird story in British folklore has been claimed for this 1 square mile of England. In the year 1184, a devastating fire destroyed Glastonbury Abbey, and pilgrim donations collapsed. In 1191, 3 inches above the knee of the tallest monk. A blonde tress, said to be Guinevere's, crumbled to dust the moment a monk grabbed it. On April 19th of 1278, in front of King Edward I and Queen Eleanor, the bones were transferred to a black marble tomb in the Abbey choir. There they remained until the dissolution of the monasteries in 1539, when the last abbot, Richard Whiting, aged 78, was hanged, drawn and quartered on the summit of the Tor, along with monks John Thorne and Roger James. His head was nailed over the Abbey gate. Modern historians treat the 1191 discovery as a fundraising hoax, since the cross-drawing, reproduced in William Camden's Britannia of 1607, uses lettering in a 10th to 11th century style that looks suspiciously like a forgery using period-appropriate antiques. But the legend persists. The Holy Thorn legend says Joseph of Arimathea thrust his staff into Weary-all Hill and woke the next morning to find it had rooted into a thorn tree that flowered twice yearly. Cuttings of the thorn survive in the Abbey ruins, in St John's Churchyard, and at Chalice Well. Every Christmas, the vicar of Glastonbury and the eldest pupil of St John's Infant School cut a sprig and send it to the reigning sovereign, a tradition begun around 1610 by Bishop James Montague to Anne of Denmark. The original Weary-all Hill thorn was vandalised and hacked apart in December of 2010 by persons unknown. Then there's the Music Festival. A dairy farmer called Michael Eavis ran a farm called Worthy Farm in the village of Pilton, just outside Glastonbury. On Saturday, September 19th of 1970, the day after Jimi Hendrix died, Eavis opened the Pilton Pop, Folk and Blues Festival. Admission was £1, with free milk from the dairy. He had wanted the Kinks to headline, but they pulled out, so Mark Bolan's Tyrannosaurus Rex took the slot. Attendance was 1,500. Eavis had hoped for 3,000. He didn't break even. The first pyramid stage was built in 1971 by a man called Andrew Kerr and Arabella Churchill, who happened to be Winston Churchill's granddaughter. Today, Glastonbury Festival has a capacity of around 210,000 people. A 2024 ticket cost £373.50. Eavis's daughter Emily now runs the operation. The whole modern festival industry of Britain essentially began on a dairy farm because one stubborn farmer thought there ought to be a place for hippies to play music near the hill where King Arthur is allegedly buried. That's the thing about Glastonbury, and honestly, that's the thing about Britain. The weird stories aren't separate from the real history. They're stacked on top of it, layer by layer, until the line between legend and ledger becomes impossible to draw, and you end up with a country where the strangest stories are also, somehow, completely true. Right, your turn. Of all 15 of these places, which one would you actually visit, and which one would you cross off the list immediately? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm especially curious whether anyone is brave enough to volunteer for the cheese roll. If you enjoyed this, click that playlist, and I'll see you there.